Down the race to lead Utah's capital city now with Jason Perry. He's the director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics, a regular guest on the show as well. Jason, thanks for coming back.
Glad to have you
on. Let's break this down. Let's look at the history. It's been a long time since Salt Lake City has had a one-term mayor.
A really long time. As I'm thinking, it's 1974.
Yeah.
That's when Jake Garn left to become senator for the state, and then, of course, went to outer space, which was amazing for him. But it's been a really long time since we have just had a one-term mayor. And an open seat is very rare also. When you look back to that, that's 2007, when Rocky Anderson was the mayor. This is into his third term, decided he's not going to run again. That was the last time we had an open seat, and that's why maybe this one is so interesting to see this coming around as a legitimate opportunity for someone.
And is that why we're seeing such a crowded field? 8 candidates throwing their hats in the ring for this position.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why. You just don't get an open seat very often. If you had ambitions to become the mayor, you keep looking at these incumbents and you start thinking you're probably not going to make it. But this is the time when you say, hey, this is anyone's game. I'm the one that can do it. I think that helps. Also, I think that there was a little perception there maybe some weakness in Jackie at the time, Mayor Biskupski, and so I think that those combinations of things came together in just the right kind of way.
Yeah, we definitely saw a mix, didn't we? We saw people jump in before she was even out saying, I'm in regardless. But then we also saw candidates like Luz Escamilla and Erin Mendenhall who waited until she was out before they jumped in. So a mix there.
That's exactly the mix that we're looking at, because you had some that were, I was just going to do it no matter what, because they perceived a weakness. But this everyone that came after were people that were just thinking about it and then saw their moment.
We're seeing this a lot, though, really. I mean, take a look at the Democratic field for 2020. What kind of an impact does it have when so many candidates are out there and voters are trying to get to know which one they want to narrow these down to?
It makes it really hard. I mean, that's just the reality is these candidates, we know some of the names because they've been in the news for a long time, some have held office, we know those folks, but there are a whole lot of candidates here that many of us have just never even heard of. We're starting to get it through debates, but it's compounded by the fact that there's very little policy difference between these candidates as well. So how do you really make your name known or to make your case to the voters when there's a lot of us and there's not a ton differentiating us on policy?
What about voter burnout? Do they look at this and say, oh, I can't even get into this, to try to figure out, who's different from who on all these issues?
It does have an impact, because we have many voters here that really want to know the issues, but this is the summer too. This is during the months when people are going on vacation, they're not really thinking about politics that much, so you've got to be kind of dedicated to understanding the candidates and the issues to really engage in this one.
I should send out a plug. We've been doing all these segments and we're going to have all of them, all 8 candidates on one website where people can look through. So, a lot of opportunities to try to get to know these candidates through that and some debates we've been seeing as well.
That is just so helpful. The closer you get to the people in terms of your elected officials, the more important those officials are. And people in Salt Lake City, it's just crucial who this mayor is. We see in the news even just this week what kind of turmoil can happen with situations where something in Salt Lake City has a big impact on the rest of the state. People should be paying close attention to this. Good for you for making sure these candidates have a chance to present their case.
Let's get into the polls. We've seen some polls. What are they telling us about this race? Because it's pretty interesting when you start to break down the numbers.
Yeah, it is interesting. Right now, the polls are suggesting that this is anyone's race for this primary. I mean, we have a bunch of candidates that are in the single digits, most of them. You have some of the names that have been on the bigger stage for a while, like Jim Dabakis, who's still in the 25-26% range in terms of the polling. But we've seen some that have started to rise. Luz Escamilla, for example, went from single digits into double digits. David Ibarra is starting to have a little bit of a climb as well, as is Erin Mendenhall. We're really starting to see the top candidates start to emerge over the past couple of weeks, and I think by the time we hit this primary day, people are going to have their minds made up.
There seems to be a pretty big difference between Dabakis, who's sitting at number 1 right now, and 2, where we're seeing pretty much a statistical tie between multiple candidates there.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're saying. Well, you look at Jim Dabakis, he's a bigger-than-life figure in the state. Many people have heard of him, but the separation between those two is interesting. But what's happening right now in the state, well, that's what voters are talking about. Very little in terms of policy. We know some names better, but this race is going to come down to execution. That's what voters are going to look at. Great, I know some of these names, I think I like some of them, but who can get it done?
So when we look at the polls right now and we see Dabakis anywhere from 10 to 12 points ahead of the next person, Do you look at that and say he's likely headed to the general?
I think if the vote were today with those kind of polling numbers and his name ID, I think it's highly likely he's one of the two candidates that comes forward. I think that very well could be the case. We don't know who's going to show up and on that cycle, and we don't know what kind of blocks are really formulating behind these candidates. We just don't know that yet. It'll be very telling.
So what is the strategy for other candidates then? Are they basically shooting, hey, we want to get that second spot? Is that what they're doing?
Well, I think so. I think this is still anyone's game, but I think that's what they're doing. So they're trying to say, I'm the one that can execute well on behalf of the city, but also I think you're going to start seeing candidates bring forward endorsements. That's what we're going to say is, hey, since our policies are so similar, if an execution is really what people are looking for, who can say I'm the best at it? I think that's what you're going to see all the way up until that primary.
We've talked about this before, you and I, about endorsements and the type of impact they could have. Typically, we see maybe a 2 to 5% impact. Could that be more in this race, given what you just talked about?
Absolutely could be, particularly since there's not a lot of difference on the policy. People say, who can vouch for this particular candidate? It's going to have a huge impact in this race because politicians sometimes think, I can shake enough hands. I can knock on enough doors to get myself elected. It goes so far, but you need a credible person that brings a lot of votes with them to say you are the best.
Okay, one of the numbers we didn't talk about were the unknowns. Yeah. That's pretty high.
It's an enormous number, and it depends on your poll you're looking at, but a significant number of people in the state of Utah have not made up their minds. I think they're going to come back from some of these vacations, and they'll start looking at the press. They'll, of course, watch your program, and then they'll make their decision. But that is why this is such an open race right now. There is no one candidate that can carry it based on their numbers right now.
One last point. Once it goes to primary, August 13th, we'll narrow it down to 2. Then it goes to the general. That's a whole new race at that point, isn't it?
Well, everything changes, not just in terms of how they attack each other or how they try to separate themselves, but there are a lot of people inside the state right now, the influencers, the people that have an interest in what happens in Salt Lake City, that have been waiting for their endorsements, getting back to what we were talking about. As soon as we have 2, people are going to say, okay, I liked everyone, but now I like one. And that's what's going to happen going forward until that final day.
Okay, I appreciate your insight as always. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.